I knew something was wrong before anyone spoke. The roast potatoes were crisping in the oven, the telly murmured the end of a Sunday match, and my mother kept wiping a perfectly clean worktop as if she could polish the air itself. My father stared too long at the garden through the French doors, jaw set, hands in pockets. My brother wouldn't meet my eyes. His knee jiggled under the table, the cutlery trembling in time. I'm Eliza Hartley, 30 years old, born in Reading, and for the last decade I've lived the kind of life that doesn't make headlines, spreadsheets, packed lunches, early trains, late emails. I'm a senior financial analyst at a logistics firm off the M4 corridor. I saved quietly and relentlessly until the number in my account felt like a railing I could grip if the world lurched. £150,000. Every pound earned with careful choices. No car loan, a second-hand hatchback paid in cash, 3 holidays in 10 years, all off-season and all budgeted to the penny. Control wasn't a cage to me. It was a kindness to the future me who would one day need it. That night, the kindness was put on trial. Saturday. Mum poured gravy with a smile so tight it looked stapled on. Dad cleared his throat. And my brother, Callum, leaned forward, eyes shiny, palms open like a man about to perform a trick. I need help, he said, voice trembling in the gap between confession and command. I owe £100,000. Gambling. I'm in with people who won't wait. I need you to step in, Eliza. Your savings, and I'll need you to co-sign a remortgage to cover the rest. The words landed like a brick in my chest. My fork hovered, ridiculous in its ordinariness. For a heartbeat I was 9 again, holding up a math certificate that nobody looked at because Callum had scored a goal in the school match and there were streamers on the sideboard. My parents' faces, then and now, were the same shape. Fear for him, expectation for me. No, I said, the smallest word I own, the hardest to carry. I'm sorry, but, no. Dad's chair scraped. We're family, he said, voice rough. We help each other. Mum set the jug down, the click of china too loud. Eliza, love, you've always been sensible. You can fix this. Callum's jaw clenched. You're the only one who can. I felt the old choreography swirling round me, guilt like a shawl being draped over my shoulders. I placed my napkin down, hands steady if not my heart. My savings are my future, I said. They're not a safety net for a habit you won't control. The room cooled. Dad's eyes hardened. Sign, or you don't come back, he said, and Mum flinched as if she hadn't already typed the sentence into her phone before the potatoes were done. I left, keys in my fist, breath small and fast, walked to my little hatchback under the streetlight and sat with my forehead against the wheel until the shaking passed. At home, my flat in Caversham felt like a cocoon stitched from all my unglamorous decisions. The tidy bookcase, the second-hand rug, the ancient kettle that rattled cheerfully before it boiled. I changed passwords. I enabled two-factor authentication. I closed every ancient joint account that should have been buried with our childhood. I watched the familiar apps spit out the green tick of secured and tried to ignore the 21 missed calls arriving like waves against a seawall. Selfish. Cold. Ungrateful. You're tearing us apart. The words stacked on my lock screen like unpaid invoices. I made tea, hands remembering the ritual even as my mind clouded. Steam fogged my glasses. I held the mug with both palms and stood by the window, watching a neighbor cycle past in a fluorescent jacket, thinking about how ordinary the night looked when a family is burning down inside it. // It starts small, this sort of thing. When we were children, Callum's chaos was branded promise. My diligence was filed under she'll be fine. He forgot homework. Teachers were charmed. I won a regional maths prize. Mum said, brilliant, darling, without looking up from a shopping list for new football boots. Dad called me our safe pair of hands and thought it was a compliment. Somewhere between the frozen aisles at Sainsbury's and the last-minute runs to training, I learned that love in our house meant showing up for the nearest fire. And because I was good with numbers, because I was quiet, because I made my own packed lunch and kept my room in lines, I became the water carrier. I didn't blame him, not exactly. The house had been teaching both of us the same lesson for years. His messes were community projects. My achievements were private hobbies. So I made a plan. Sixth form job at the Oxfam shop counting tills and steaming blouses, a student account at NatWest, budgeting apps, index funds, ISAs, the works. While Callum skidded across rules like rain off a wax jacket, I tightened bolts. It wasn't joyless. It was relief. Which is why, when the ultimatum arrived with the roast, it felt less like a plea and more like an eviction notice from the person I used to be. Monday morning, 6:15, the email alert pinged. Multiple failed login attempts on an old family utility account. A relic. A place where teenage pocket money once pooled for pizza. My mouth went dry. I pictured Callum's restless thumb, late at night, trying doors to see what still opened. I shut it. I shut everything. Then I rang Freya. Freya is the sort of friend you get once, if you're lucky. We met in a spreadsheet training the year I joined the firm. She laughed at a pivot table joke I didn't know was funny out loud. She ordered peppermint tea and listened like it was an art form. Come round, she said. I'll toast crumpets. We can spread peanut butter too thick and talk like we're in sixth form. I walked the mile to her terrace with my scarf over my mouth and breathed in the cold. In her kitchen the radio murmured quietly, and the toaster misbehaved, and everything was correct. They've made their choices, Freya said, butter pooling in a crater. Your savings are not an ambulance. I cried then, not for the money, but for the child who wanted someone to say exactly that. By afternoon, a message from my cousin Nadia arrived. He's done this before, Lisa. He took $2,000 from Auntie Sal for rent, then blew it on a weekend in Brighton. They kept it quiet to protect him. Please don't do this. They won't stop if you do. The picture sharpened. This wasn't a single catastrophe. It was a curriculum, and I had always been the final exam. Wednesday, Callum went public. A Facebook essay about betrayal, about a sister who chose money over blood. Old neighbors Tut reacted. A PE teacher from primary school said he was heartbroken it had come to this. Distant cousins offered moral guidance like sweets nobody asked for. I didn't reply. Engaging with a fire only teaches it to burn brighter. That afternoon, a knock at my door. Mum and Dad. A manila folder, the thin gravity of paper that binds decades. "Co-sign this," Dad said. "It's the only way to save him." Mum's eyes were red in a way that told me she had been crying for hours and for years. "Please," she whispered, fingers worrying the edge of the folder. "We're family. We stick." I set the papers on the table and read. The interest rate was a threat disguised as maths. The term would swallow my 30s. One signature, and the life I'd built would have a trapdoor. "No," I said again, softer now, because the first no is for them but the second is for you. "This isn't about family. It's about choices." Dad's face closed like a fist. "We raised you." "I know," I said. "And now I'm raising me." They left with the weather in their coats. The silence afterward was not peace, it was fallout. That night, while I was waiting for lentils to stop tasting like penance, an email slid into my inbox from Leeds. A firm I'd met at a conference last spring. "We've a senior role opening, strategy and modeling, hybrid, better salary, relocation support. Your name came up twice. Would you be open to a chat?" I stood very still, spoon in the air. The city unspooled in my mind, the calls from the north, the river, the hum of a place that could be mine. The universe doesn't always send signs. Sometimes you've built a ladder so meticulously that, when an open window appears, you can step through it without looking down. Callum rang at midnight. "You think you're better than us," he hissed, voice thick with whatever the night had poured into him. "You're leaving me to drown." I kept my voice level. "I'm not your solution." He swore. I hung up. My hands were steady. In the morning I replied to Leeds. "Yes. .. Moving was less dramatic than I'd imagined. Life rarely provides a trumpet. I gave notice on my flat. Sold the car to a teacher with kind eyes. Cancelled a gym membership I'd been guilt-paying for 2 years. Boxed my life into 3 categories: keep, donate, let go. The last was the hardest and the most necessary. On my final night in reading, I walked by the Thames path and let the water teach me one of its quiet lessons. Something can flow without apology and still be gentle. Freya hugged me so hard my shoulder cracked. "Text when you get there," she said, eyes bright. "And when you don't want to text. And when you want a distraction. And when you want silence. I'll send both." Leeds welcomed me like a city that knows it is enough. Brick and glass and old warehouses turned warm with light. My new office sat above the river with windows that made even spreadsheets look like art. Tom, my new director, shook my hand and said, "I've wanted someone who obsesses over balances and boundaries. You tick both." I rented a small flat near Chapel Allerton with a balcony big enough for a table and a basil plant I promised not to kill. On my first Friday, the team took me to a street food market where steam rose into the cold and strangers apologized when they brushed your coat, and music threaded through conversations like a friendly dog. I slept the whole night for the first time in months. Of course the past followed. Nadia sent updates like weather reports you don't want and still check. "He's gone deeper, Lisa. Mum and Dad remortgaged the house. It's tight. I'm worried." Then, "Creditors are circling. He's talking about double or nothing." Then, months later, They've defaulted. The bank is moving. Grief came, as it does. But it came clean. Not laced with the sedative of false responsibility. I lit a candle on my windowsill that evening and said their names into the quiet, Helen and Graham and Callum. I wished them clarity. I did not dial their number. I started therapy with Dr. Asha Patel, who wore navy jumpers and had a way of letting silence do some of the talking. They taught you that rescue is love, she said once, kindness carefully stitched through each word. What are you learning now? That love is not alone, I said, surprising myself. And that I'm allowed to decline credit. She smiled. Good. Say it again. I did. On Saturdays, I volunteer at a community center off Meanwood Road, teaching a dozen teenagers anything their schools forgot to mention about money, how direct debits work, what compound interest is, the kind that hugs or the kind that bites, why a budget is a mirror not a punishment. We draw ladders on scrap paper and label the rungs: rent, food, savings, joy. We write joy on the paper first so they see it belongs on the page. A boy called Jamal rests his chin in his palm and asks, "What do you do when your own family is the overdraft?" I take a breath. You close the account, I say. You tell them you love them, if you do. You choose how much, how often, and in what currency you give. But you do not make your future small to keep someone else's present from consequence. He nods, slow. That sounds hard. It is, I say. It's also how you stay. Work flourished in the way work does when your life no longer leaks through the floorboards. I put together a model that saved a client 7 figures across a contract, and Tom clapped his hands like a delighted seal in the meeting, and I laughed so hard I almost snorted in front of the CFO. I took a train to Manchester for a presentation and watched the Pennines roll by like the back of a sleeping animal, and I thought, I made a decision and it made room for me. At home, I learned gentle rituals that cost little and paid well, batch cooking soups on Sunday night, watering the basil plant and apologizing to it when I forgot, reading in bed with the phone in another room, writing on a scrap of paper 3 things I did that were small and good, replied to Nadia kindly, walked when I didn't want to, put £200 into the ISA even though the headlines were loud. Some nights, the ache visited. It doesn't ask permission. I let it sit at the end of the bed like an old aunt who tells the same stories. We listened to each other breathe. Then it left. Autumn flushed the trees at Roundhay Copper and Amber. I ran, even though I am not a runner, even though my body prefers the rhythm of brisk walks and hot baths after. The air stung sweetly in my lungs. I thought of 12-year-old me, of university me taking notes with a biro run to a nub, of 25-year-old me saying no to a city break I could have afforded but chose not to. I wanted to tell them that their faithfulness would one day buy us a balcony where the light falls just so on a Tuesday. Nadia's final message about the house arrived on a rainy Wednesday. It's done. They moved last weekend into a rented place near the Ring Road. I don't know where he is. I'm sorry. I replied, I'm here when you want normal talk. Bake Off, coats, the weather. I love you. I meant it. Boundaries did not make my love smaller, they made it honest. Then came the evening that felt, quietly, like a hinge. I stood in the community center after class, wiping numbers from the whiteboard. A girl, Saffron, hovered with her backpack on one shoulder. I liked what you said, she mumbled, eyes on the floor. About joy belonging on the budget. Good, I said. Because otherwise what's the point? She glanced up. My mum says I'm selfish when I save for a camera. We need food. But I want the camera. I want to see things. I nodded. You can want both, I said. You can put 20 quid towards food this week and a fiver in the camera jar. The jar is a vote for your future. Tiny votes counted for is how elections are won. She smiled at that, just a little. I'll keep voting, she said. Even when Mum shouts. Especially then, I said. When she left, I leaned my forehead against the cool of the whiteboard and laughed quietly because if you don't laugh in a room that smells of dust and lemon cleaner, you might never learn how. There's a story my family tells about me now. I've heard the shape of it through mutuals. I abandoned blood. I chose money. I forgot where I came from. It comforts them to say it. Maybe one day they'll tire of the refrain. Maybe not. Here is the story I tell. I chose a life I can stand inside without apologizing for taking up space. I refused to turn my future into a bucket for someone else's fire. I still love the people who taught me the wrong equations. I just stopped using their maths. Sometimes I imagine writing to them. I don't send it. But the unsent letter exists because it is a private ceremony of truth. Dear Mum and Dad, thank you for the early bedtimes and the packed lunches and the way you clapped when I sang out of tune in year 2. Thank you for teaching me, by accident, that responsibility without reciprocity is not virtue but erosion. I have stopped eroding. This is not a punishment, it is a boundary. Boundaries are the shape of care that doesn't disappear itself. Love, Eliza. I fold it and put it in a drawer with batteries and plasters. The practical things that keep a life going. Tonight, Leeds hums. The neighbor upstairs is learning the trumpet and is currently, heroically, losing. The basil plant is alive. I have 2 clean mugs. My ISA contribution went through, and somehow that sentence makes me feel steadier than any motivational quote on the internet. I open the balcony door and let October in. If you're reading this, if you're standing in a kitchen where the gravy is thick with obligation and someone you love is asking you to set yourself on fire to keep them warm, here is what I know in my bones now. Breathe. Lock what must be locked. Name your numbers out loud and believe them. Find one person who speaks to your steady part and sit in their kitchen until you remember your name. Write a plan that is smaller than your fear and bigger than your guilt. Say no once. Say it again. Say it the 3rd time that teaches your bones their own names. Put joy on the budget first so you cannot erase it later. Choose a future that would make your younger self unclench. Then keep going. I close the balcony. The city quiets. My phone lights. A text from Freya. Train to Leeds Friday? I'll bring crumpets if you bring that ridiculous jam. I grin at the screen and type back, deal. And I've got the thick peanut butter. I rinse a mug. The sound is ordinary and holy. I turn off the light. And somewhere, in another house, a family still argues with itself about what help means. I let the sound fade like a radio tuned one station too far. I'm not an audience anymore. I'm, finally, living my own program. // I climb into bed and feel the shape of my life settle around me, earned, honest, enough. If I pray these days, it's simple and without bargaining. May I keep the promises I make when I am not afraid. I close my eyes. Leeds keeps humming. The basil keeps breathing. The future keeps its appointment. That night, before sleeping, I opened my phone one last time and scrolled to an old photo. 4 faces at a Christmas table, paper crowns tilted, my own smile polite and small. I stared at it for a long while, not with anger but with something quieter, acceptance. Families aren't built from blood alone, they're built from choice, respect, and truth. I whispered to the girl in the picture, "You kept us safe." Then I pressed delete, not out of spite, but to make space. Space for what comes next, and for who I'm finally allowed to become.